Hi everyone. So a topic that's been going around the pagan YouTube community a lot at the moment is that of masculinity and femininity, or the male and female, within paganism, mostly specifically within Wicca. But it is definitely a topic that is important to paganism in general, probably largely because so much of neo-paganism is influenced by Wicca, and so many pagans have at least encountered Wicca, or they may have first gone through a phase of being Wiccan. But I feel like it's definitely an issue that's important to anyone who is looking at the divine from a perspective of being more than just, say, monotheistic. Anyone who is interested in polytheism, in viewing the divine through more than one guise, in even mythology, or in accessing deities, even just as metaphors, or indeed as archetypes. No matter what your perspective is on it, generally speaking, if you are pagan, you are going to be in some way interested in different faces of the divine. That's putting it very generally, and like obviously I'm not a hard or devotional polytheist. Not all pagans are polytheists. But it's definitely something that runs kind of through the community. And then there is always that issue of not only polytheism, or the many faces of the divine, but the issue of the male and the female, the masculine and the feminine, and what role that plays in our spirituality. So I've only actually watched 3 of these videos. I know there have been a lot more made. I've seen a list on Annie, her channel's called Mirth and Reverence. If you haven't checked out her channel, I'm sure most of you probably have, but if you haven't, you definitely should. She is a traditional Wiccan, and she's been practicing for a very long time, and she's really, really interesting. Obviously her practice differs a lot, say, from mine, because she is a traditional Wiccan, but it's I think for anyone who is on this sort of path, her perspective is very interesting, particularly as she's coming at it from a place of many, many, many years of experience. So I've watched her video, and in that video, in the description, she has listed various other videos that have been made on the topic, which I haven't had a chance to watch yet. I actually started, I found this topic, the first video that I watched was Jer's video, and it was Jer who originally posited the question. The original video was Michelle's video, which I will also link below. I'll link the 3 videos that I've watched, I'll link them below. But the conversation basically came about because Jer is, I suppose you could say, having a bit of crisis of faith, in that he has come to paganism or Wicca. I know he uses the term Wiccan-ish rather than necessarily Wiccan, but his practice is so far very much influenced by Wicca. He came to it a couple of years ago, and he's just reaching a point now where he is starting to question, or, oh well, actually I don't know, maybe he's always been questioning, I'm not altogether sure, how the god and the goddess fit into the practice, how many different elements of Wicca are influenced by this idea of the male-female binary kind of idea, and that kind of thing, and he's just finding it very problematic. So the original video, Michelle's original video, was kind of in response to a discussion that they'd had, a question that he'd asked, and then everything is sort of stemmed from there. Annie's video was very interesting because it kind of touched on a few things that I was thinking of when I was watching the first couple of videos that I watched. And she was talking about how, for her, and probably for a lot of Wiccans, or most Wiccans, I don't really know if you can say that there's one primary view on these kind of things across the board, because obviously it's a very sort of individualistic kind of path. But for her, although the image of the male and female gender is there, and she definitely associates the masculine and feminine with projective and receptive, for her it's not about actual physical or human or physiological gender. And that's something I come across quite a lot, and this is something that Kellyanne, the Four Queens, has talked about as well, although she hasn't actually made a video on this specific topic at this time. Anybody who has encountered Jung, or who likes Jung, or has found him interesting or useful or informative, or if he's shaped their path at all, they have definitely come across this idea of the binary of masculine and feminine in a way that doesn't necessarily suggest physiological gender. And this is definitely the only way that I can really feel like it makes any sense. And I can definitely understand how people who see it that way come around to it. So that it's not, the idea is not to sort of pigeonhole males and females into these kind of roles, or to sort of assign very limiting kind of roles onto the ideas of male and female, but rather to sort of use the male-female duality as a way to look at the duality of the all, or the duality and balance that is prevalent, well, that kind of holds the whole universe together, which is the way that an awful lot of us pagans see things. I definitely think that Jung has actually had more influence on this than people often realise, because a lot of the earlier kind of pagan, neo-pagan Wiccan writers, particularly in the 60s and 70s, a lot of the major names, their writings, you know, like Starhawk and Dorian Valiente. You know, when you don't say a name out loud and you try to say it out loud and you've no idea if you're actually remembering it right, but you know all those major names. A lot of their writing is actually very influenced by Jungian thought. There's a lot of stuff there about archetypes and symbols, and there is a lot of stuff kind of about the idea of the masculine and feminine, and that it is present within everybody, which was something that Annie did mention in her video, that the goddess is in everyone, whether you are male or female, and so is the god. And that is definitely, I don't think I've ever come across a Wiccan who didn't have that kind of idea about the masculine, the divine masculine and the divine feminine. It's not that it's divided by physiological gender. It's more of a sort of, well, in some ways you could say it's more of a sort of a symbol for some sort of overarching duality or balance that can be seen across the cosmos as a whole. And as much as I can accept that, and as much as I can kind of get on board with that, it's never been something that has sat with me. It's never been something that I was able to completely just adopt into my practice. And I think this is one of the reasons why I kind of moved away from Wicca and paganism again after I had initially sort of tried it on, I suppose you could say, when I was in my teenage years. And this is because, although you might say that femininity and masculinity has nothing to do with being male or being female, or anything like that, the association is still there. And although maybe a lot of the major works, the major texts, that Wicca and indeed most of neo-paganism has kind of evolved out of, a lot of those early texts, although they are influenced quite a lot by Jung, and definitely have that feeling, not that these ideas have to be assigned those rigid roles, but that they are something more fluid and very definitely a mix of both within everyone. There is no getting away from the fact that the image that is used to portray this idea of the receptive and to some degree the passive, and things like intuition and all those sort of feminine traits, is female, is the goddess. And the symbol or figure that is used to represent the projective, to some degree the assertive and the active, it is a male figure of the god. And for me, I've never been able to get away from the problematic connotations of that. I think, as much as anything in terms of being uncomfortable with that sort of gender binary, I also just have never been able to quite get to grips with why the idea of the male and female, or the feminine and masculine, is particularly useful as a sort of a binary pair to represent the all, or the cosmos, because I could never really see why the idea of gender, even as a symbol, could be seen to transcend humans or life, at the very most life. I very definitely I've never let go of that idea of kind of acknowledging a kind of binary system or a balance. Even though I've never really thought of it as being very literal, I definitely haven't let go of that. But what I've ended up doing is actually using different symbols or different ideas to represent that balance of opposites in the universe. And male and female has just really not worked for me now for a long time. And that idea was actually one of the first things that I let go of or got rid of when I started to really mix up my my practice and to start to really actually create my own practice, which I've been doing now for several years. I mean, obviously it kind of initially comes from Gerald Gardner. He had this very strong, almost obsession, you could possibly say, with the idea of, I suppose you could say sex, with the idea of the binary kind of, almost like the magnetism between the male and female as an opposite pair, and the way that they come together to form life. It's definitely powerful imagery, it's a powerful symbol, and it's definitely a powerful symbol for creation and creativity. And as such, it is a symbol that I have used at times, but it's just never been central for me. But I think it's important to remember that as well as all this Jungian thought that has filtered into paganism in a very huge way. It does all stem from that original idea of this sort of almost kind of revering heterosexual sex and heterosexual love. And at the time when this was coming about, it wasn't considered to be sort of un-PC, to be sort of elevating heterosexual love over anything else, because that was the society that Gardner was living in. It was, you know, a long time ago, homosexuality wasn't accepted in society, generally speaking. So that wasn't considered to be problematic. This is all stuff that has come up over the last couple of decades, that people have started to think that those kind of ideas are problematic and exclusionary. But yeah, although I am heterosexual, or at least in a heterosexual relationship, I actually don't generally like to label myself as heterosexual or straight. I feel like my sexuality is relatively fluid, although I've only been in relationships with men. It's not a label that I find I'm really interested in getting on board with. I am in a heterosexual relationship. That's how it is for me. But so I suppose maybe that's why it's never been something that's particularly interesting for me when it comes to my spirituality. It's never something that I've wanted to use as a sort of symbolic kind of method to tap into the divine. But of course, you can look at it from that kind of symbolic perspective, but what kind of confuses me about this as well is that for most Wiccans, the god and goddess aren't necessarily just symbolic or metaphorical or even just archetypal. The god and goddess for most Wiccans are very much real. They are often sentient or conscious beings. And belief systems obviously vary hugely as to how, you know, quite a lot of Wiccans ascribe to that belief. Oh, I can't think of the word off the top of my head now, but where the god and goddess have sort of been brought into being by people revering them or believing in them. Egregore? Oh, okay, I can't think of the word off the top of my head. It's not something that I've ever been particularly interested in, to be honest. And then you kind of have to start asking questions of, well, if they are seen as entities in their own right, then what are they in the universe? And I suppose for some Wiccans or pagans, they are dualists. They see, well, not only in terms of matter and say matter versus the mind, you know, matter and consciousness being separate, but also a lot of Wiccans and pagans have this idea of there being a spirit realm, or a sort of another sort of plane of existence or type of matter that exists sort of in some way slightly separate to our own experience of the universe. So I suppose for some of them, maybe the god and goddess reside on that plane, or I'm not actually, this is something I probably should think about more, because also for most Wiccans, the god and goddess are, they are not just transcendent, they are immanent, they are within earth, they are, often goddess and god are earth, they are very much present. So that's another kind of, but so yeah, so what I'm trying to say is, for those people, I'm not altogether sure always what they see the god and goddess as being, how they fit in for them into the fabric of the universe, into the fabric of our daily experiences, if they're not just symbolic or metaphoric or even, say, archetypal. And this is where it gets seriously problematic for me, because as I was saying, the idea of the masculine, feminine, male, female, binary stuff doesn't really flick my switch. But also, when I sat down to really think about what the divine actually was to me many years ago, one of the first problems I came up against was, well, what does this binary system of the male and female actually represent on a greater level of the entire universe, or the entire creative process of the universe? And that is where it's always fallen down for me, that I haven't really been able to assign particular roles. As I've said before, creation destruction works for me, and the manifest and the unmanifest. The way that it works, the primary way that I see the all, see the cosmos, see the divine, is that the universe as we experience it now, that we are living in, is the manifest. But it comes from a place of the unmanifest. The unmanifest, this is what things return to, this is what things come out of. It is just sort of that mystery, that abyss, that mysterious nothingness or somethingness out of which everything comes and disappears back into and came originally. It's something quite abstract. It's not something that I see as necessarily a physical thing or a place. It's more of an abstract concept. And then creation and destruction, or the forces of creativity and destruction, are maybe the key figures when it comes to this. Creation or creativity is what pushes things out of that place of non-existence, out of the unmanifest into being. And then destruction pulls it back in again to, I generally think of the unmanifest as being the dark mother, the mother that devours, the mother that consumes back in order to create again, in order to push forth again. And these ideas of the unmanifest and the manifest, creation and destruction, and there's also, I sometimes add into that the binary of order and chaos. So that's a little bit more vague for me, because order and chaos for me are kind of pretty much always present everywhere. They're harder to pin down. So those ideas for me, they came into my practice because when I thought about how I felt about the cosmos, how I felt about how things worked, those were the primary ideas that felt most important to me and that called to me most, and that I could kind of relate to very concrete and observable phenomena in the universe and on Earth. And when I sat down to try and decide what I thought the divine even meant and why it should be male and female, well, first of all, I couldn't really decide what I thought the divine was at all. What was that thing that we were saying, this is divinity, this is God, this is, whatever. I suppose I've never really come up with an answer for that, and pantheism sort of provided me with an answer to an extent, because it sort of, it gave me the freedom to accept that everything could be the divine, and that I didn't necessarily have to find the divine within cosmos. Cosmos could be the divine, which was kind of how I always felt it, but I didn't think that was something that you could believe or something that you could get on board with. It just wasn't, it took me reading a few things and really coming across pantheism and getting to grips with it to actually fully realise that was an accepted belief system. And obviously now I wouldn't have such difficulty with fully getting on board with what I personally believe. I'd probably be quicker to come to that kind of conclusion, or to decide, right, well, this is what it is for me. It doesn't matter if other people don't think that's a viable belief, that's how it works for me. But at the time I was only starting to really think very seriously about such questions. But yeah, basically the male and female, I couldn't assign it to anything. I have come across various different ideas as to what the goddess and the god could represent. So the idea of the god as the manifest and the goddess as the unmanifest kind of is one idea, or the goddess as sort of energy and the god as matter. There's quite a lot of different ideas like that, but none of them really worked for me because I couldn't really see why they should be male or female or masculine or feminine. I couldn't really make that connection. I was like kind of thinking, right, okay, fine, I will accept that there could be the binary system of energy and matter, or manifest and unmanifest, but why should the energy be female and the matter male, or vice versa? It just never really quite made sense for me. So I'm kind of going around in circles a little bit here, but I just wanted to kind of share with you my thoughts on this. And I think most of all, I think what's most important is that if you really resonate with the idea of the god and goddess, but you feel as though there's something stopping you, there's something kind of blocking you from really being able to integrate it into your practice, because you feel like there are all these labels attached to them or ideas attached to them, and that they have become almost sort of small and confined, and that, you know, the goddess is wet and dark and receptive and passive, and the god is active and hot and dry and all of these things. If that doesn't work for you, I very much feel like throw it out, get rid of it. But if the symbol at some basic level is working for you and really resonating for you, and is evoking some major kind of divine connection kind of feelings, that symbol of the god and goddess as a binary pair, then don't get rid of that. Olivia Egyptian made a video just there about not just throwing out your old beliefs if you really believe them. You know, don't just abandon them just because you've gotten interested in some other path and you think, oh well, now I can't believe in that thing that I believed in before. There are so many different combinations and different ways that we can see things, that I think there's always a way to integrate these things into your practice. And I think if the symbol of the god and goddess works for you, but you just can't quite get on board with any of the major ideas that are out there in Wicca as to what they might represent, or how you might commune with them or whatever, then I think there is something there. Obviously it is resonating with your unconscious, and you probably have your own associations in your own mind as to why they're important and why they are the faces of the divine that, you know, you most resonate with. And there's definitely going to be a reason there. It's not just random, you know. There is a reason that you were drawn to this path in the first place. But I think it's very important for people to be honest with themselves about these things, and to really think about them, you know, not to just blindly accept, oh yes, okay, well, I'm interested in Wicca and there's the god and goddess and they represent these things, and earth, air and fire and water, they are also divided into feminine and masculine. I think sometimes that these kind of symbols or faces of the divine, they can become more powerful again once you've completely deconstructed them and pulled them apart and really got down to the basics of what your beliefs really are and in what way they actually resonate with you. And then you might actually find yourself going back to something that looks very like Wiccan practice again, because once you strip it all back and get to that very core belief, that core sort of that core spark that sort of responds to those images, that responds to that language, and that responds to that idea. Once you get to that core, you will then have a much better idea of which things you can just completely dismiss offhand and think, no, that doesn't work for me in my idea of the god or goddess, because this is what that idea is. I think a lot of that sort of cognitive dissonance arises when people they might think that they have it, that they know where they're coming from with these things, but maybe they just haven't stripped it all back enough and gotten to the basics enough. And I tell this to people all the time. I have people asking me sometimes, often just not even with coherent questions, but just saying, I I'm interested in paganism. I don't know where to start with my spirituality. I'm really overwhelmed. Where can I start? What should I read? What should I do? And a lot of the time I kind of say, well, I don't know. Yes, you might find a book and it might be perfect for you, and you know, you might read it and say, yes, it's perfect. I'm just going to follow this structure and work from there. And that can be very useful because it can give you ideas as to things that that do work for you, and you might be able to start pulling out the things that do and don't. But most of all, I say to people, try and just sit with your feeling of divinity. Sit with that part of yourself that feels like something is divine, or that feels like something is deserving of your reverence and your time, and just try to get to the bottom of that. What do you associate with that feeling, and when does it arise for you, and why do you think it's important? And I think there's an awful lot to be gained from just mining your own brain. I think people can sort of be a bit dismissive of their own ideas and thoughts and beliefs, particularly if they don't think of themselves as being particularly intelligent or academic or whatever, or philosophical or whatever. And that's all very well if you don't feel like coming up with these ideas or these structures is your forte. That's fine, and you can always turn to other material for inspiration if you really feel you need it. But I think, and Annie actually has talked about this before, quite a few different pagan YouTubers have talked about this before, kind of finding that, for the phrase that Annie uses is, what do you know? Find what you know and work from there. And I think that's very important when it comes to this question of the feminine and the masculine, and whether or not you want to use that binary system in your practice and what it might mean for you. I think this video has probably already gotten a bit long. I was also going to talk a bit about my ideas about the feminine, the divine feminine and the divine masculine, because having said all that, that particular binary pair doesn't work for me as representation of the all. Of course, I do work with deities, so I do work with divine female figures, divine male figures, but that actually might be a video for another day. Maybe I'll kind of cut it off there, and I'll come back and talk about that again. But I will just say that it's complicated for me, because for me, I've never really given a lot of power to that idea of gender or the masculine and feminine. And I've never really given an awful lot of thought to how much of me might be masculine or feminine, because it's just not, they're not words that really work for me. But then I think it's something that you can't completely escape if you do work with deities. Deities are, they're based on human figures. They're inspired by human figures. So they are inevitably going to be male or female. Sometimes they are a bit of both, but they're definitely one or the other, or occasionally both. And that is definitely something that maybe I need to get to grips with a bit more, something I need to think about a bit more, and think about the main deities that I work with, and is it important that they are male or female, and why? And I definitely work with more female deities, and I think that's mostly because I'm female, and that's probably something that I should think about a bit more. But I might do another video on that, because I've been meaning to do some kind of more introductory videos, more kind of basic videos, talking about some of the basic concepts that I have that work into my spiritual practice. So I might work another video into that, because this one I think has gotten a bit long. So I hope, Jer, if you're watching this, I hope this was in some way useful, and anyone else who has had issues with this topic, I hope it gives you just an idea of how you might start to unravel your thoughts on this. And never take it as a given, and you don't have to buy into other people's ideas on this. But at the same time, if it works for you, if the symbolism works for you, if the idea works for you, then find a way to make it work, because there probably is one.